It was around midnight when I first noticed the crackling. It wasn't the usual fuzz or static you hear when the baby monitor's signal gets weak. No, this was different. This was deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. At first, I thought it was just the usual glitching, a product of the old model we've been using for years. But then it started, the unmistakable sound of breathing. I glanced at the clock, 12:01 a.m. I turned the volume on the monitor up, but all I could hear was that heavy, labored breathing. My daughter, Lily, had been asleep for hours. At least I thought she had been. She was only 3, and I knew her sleeping patterns by heart. This didn't sound like her. Lily's breath was soft, gentle, not like the wheezing, shallow gasps coming through the speaker now. I could feel my pulse quicken, an inexplicable chill running down my spine. I leaned in closer, straining to make out the sound. My fingers hovered over the dial, but I couldn't seem to pull myself away from the eerie noise. The room was silent except for that sound, the breathing. And then I heard a voice. It was low, almost a whisper, but distinct enough for me to hear it clearly over the static. "Mommy, is that you?" The words froze me in place. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. It was Lily's voice, but something about it, something about the way she said it, was off. Too soft. Too knowing. The shiver ran down my back, but I pushed it aside. I had to check on her. It was the only thing that made sense. I couldn't just sit here, listening to what I hoped was nothing more than some weird glitch in the system. I grabbed the monitor, and my heart hammered as I made my way to her room. The hallway felt colder than usual, a strange sense of heaviness hanging in the air. The house, usually full of the warmth of Lily's laughter, felt hollow, like a space that had been drained of life. I reached the door to her room, my hand resting on the knob, but I hesitated. The voice I'd heard wasn't hers. It couldn't have been. I tried to shake off the growing dread, but it gnawed at me, twisting my stomach into knots. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door slowly, careful not to wake her. But the room was dark, the air thick with a strange heaviness. The baby monitor, still in my hand, emitted a soft hum, but Lily's bed was empty. I stepped inside, my heart racing, my breath shallow. There, in the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and I felt something watching me. I swallowed hard and moved toward the crib. It was empty too. My gaze darted around the room, looking for any sign of her, but there was nothing. Nothing but the oppressive silence and the strange feeling of being watched. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. It was a text from Sarah, my wife. "How's she doing? Is she asleep?" I quickly typed back, trying to steady my trembling hands. "Yeah, she's fine. Just checking in." But deep down, I wasn't fine. The feeling in the room was suffocating. I left the room quickly, the monitor still in my hand, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I thought I saw movement, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I glanced at the monitor again, its screen glowing faintly in the dark. The breathing had stopped, but there was a new sound now, a soft, muffled giggle, and then a voice clear as day. "Mommy, you can't see me." I froze. The voice wasn't Lily's. This wasn't my daughter. I turned the monitor off and set it down, feeling sick to my stomach. My instincts told me to go check on Lily again, to make sure she was safe. But something told me, something deep inside, if I went back in there, I might not find her at all. I didn't know what to do. The voice on the monitor wasn't my daughter's, and it felt like something had just crossed into our world. Something dark, something that shouldn't be here. I glanced down the hallway, the silence now deafening. My skin crawled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I didn't know it yet, but the nightmare was only just beginning. I had to find out what was going on. I had to protect her. But what if what I was hearing was real? The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur, each moment dragging like an eternity. I couldn't shake the voice on the baby monitor. It replayed in my head over and over again. "Mommy, you can't see me." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark corner of Lily's room, the shifting shadows that felt almost alive. I kept telling myself it was just a glitch, a faulty connection. Maybe it was the old monitor playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something wasn't right. Lily had been quiet after that, her usual innocent chatter replaced by silence. She wasn't the type of kid to sleep through the night without calling for me at least once. It was unlike her to stay so still, especially after what had happened. I tried to convince myself that she was just sleeping soundly, but every time I looked at her empty crib, a knot formed in my chest. I sat in the living room, waiting for Sarah to return from her errands, my eyes glued to the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table. The screen was blank, the static now replaced with a faint hum. My fingers itched to turn it back on, but I hesitated, afraid of what I might hear next. That was when the silence in the house shifted. A faint sound echoed down the hallway. A child's laugh. It wasn't Lily's. I could tell. Lily's laugh was high-pitched, full of joy, like the soft tinkling of wind chimes. This laugh was different. It was hollow, distorted, like it came from somewhere deep underground. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound sinking into my bones like ice. I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me. The laughter continued, echoing through the empty house. It was too dark, too quiet. My breath was shallow, and every instinct told me to stay put, but I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. I had to protect Lily. I grabbed the baby monitor from the table and crept down the hallway, my footsteps careful and measured, like I was moving through a dream I couldn't wake from. The laughter grew louder the closer I got to her room. I reached for the door to her nursery, my hand hovering over the knob, but then I froze. Something was different. The air was thick with an unnatural coldness, like the warmth of the house had been sucked out, leaving only a void. I pushed the door open slowly, holding my breath, praying I'd find Lily tucked into her crib, perfectly fine, asleep and unaware of whatever madness had begun. But when I stepped inside, my blood ran cold. The crib was still empty. The room, however, was far from empty. In the corner, where the shadows used to be harmless, I saw something moving. Something small, something that shouldn't be there. A figure, a child-sized figure, hunched low to the ground, its back turned to me. It was too dark to make out clearly, but I could see enough. Its long, spindly arms and the way it moved, jerking and twitching like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the movement stopped. The figure turned around. I gasped, my hand clutching the doorframe for support, my breath catching in my throat. The thing in the corner, it wasn't Lily. It wasn't even human. Its face was pale, too pale. Its eyes, black and hollow, stared at me with a coldness that made my skin crawl. Its mouth stretched wide, too wide, forming a grin that seemed to split its face in half, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "Mommy," it whispered in that same familiar voice. "I've been waiting for you." I felt my blood turn to ice. The voice, it was my daughter's voice, but it was twisted, guttural, like it had been pulled through something dark and unnatural. Before I could react, before I could scream or run, the figure was gone. It melted into the shadows like it had never been there at all. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I turned on the baby monitor, my hands shaking, but all I heard was static. Nothing else. Nothing. The room felt colder, emptier, like the very essence of it had been drained away. I looked around desperately, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was I hallucinating? Was I losing my mind? Then I heard it. A soft giggle. The same laugh from earlier. It came from behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The door was wide open, the hallway dark and silent. My thoughts were racing, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone in this house anymore. Something that wasn't Lily was here, and it was getting closer. I couldn't move. The giggle, soft and sinister, echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls like it was closing in on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I felt the temperature drop even further. My breath was shallow, my mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Mommy, you're scared, aren't you?" The voice again, my daughter's voice, but distorted, like it had been twisted into something malevolent. I whirled around, searching the room for any sign of her. But Lily was still gone. The nursery, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a tomb. I stepped backward, my back hitting the wall as panic clawed at my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. What was this thing? What had happened to my daughter? The whispers grew louder now, overlapping each other, filling my ears with frantic voices that all seemed to say the same thing over and over. "Mommy, come closer. Come closer." I glanced down at the baby monitor in my hand, my eyes wide with fear. It was on, but there was nothing but static, no voice, no words. But the whispers were still there. I turned my head sharply, feeling the coldness wrapping around me, choking the air from my lungs. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, by the crib, Lily stood. No, it wasn't her. It was a distorted version of her. A pale, emaciated form, her eyes wide and black, her mouth stretching unnaturally, that same grin pulling at her face, her head tilted at an odd angle. I staggered forward, my hands shaking as I reached for her, but the closer I got, the more wrong it all felt. It wasn't her. This thing that looked like her, wasn't my daughter. The figure in front of me giggled again, that hollow, empty laugh. "You should have stayed away," it whispered. "Now you'll never get her back." Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in, and the floor beneath my feet trembled, like the very foundation of the house was cracking. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, as if the house itself was alive, suffocating me. And then, in the center of it all, I heard something. A sound I hadn't expected. The sound of Lily crying. It was faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but then it grew louder, more desperate. My heart shattered as I recognized it. This was my daughter. It wasn't the thing in front of me. It was her. "Mommy, help me." I looked around frantically, the sound of her crying coming from every corner of the room. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was this my daughter, or was it the thing that had taken her place? "She's in here with me," the twisted version of Lily said, its grin widening. "She's never going to leave me." I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, pushing past the horrifying figure. I had to find Lily. I had to get her out of this nightmare. The cries grew louder as I stumbled through the darkness, following the sound, trying to find my daughter. My vision blurred with fear, but I couldn't stop. The cries were so close now, I could almost touch them. Then I saw it. At the far end of the room, behind the crib, a small door I hadn't noticed before. The door was cracked open, a sliver of light spilling out from the other side. I rushed toward it, heart pounding, terrified of what I might find on the other side. The thing that had taken Lily's place, the twisted, dark version of her, reached out, grabbing at my ankle with cold, skeletal fingers. I kicked it away, not daring to look back, and pushed through the door. On the other side, it was dark. Too dark. The walls were damp, the air thick with an acrid smell of decay. The cries, my daughter's cries, were coming from deep within the room, echoing off the walls. I couldn't see her. I couldn't see anything. Lily, Lily, where are you? My voice was shaky, but I couldn't let fear stop me now. I had to find her. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the far corner, I saw a small figure huddled on the floor, rocking back and forth. It was Lily, or at least it looked like her, but her eyes were wide and unblinking, empty, like she was trapped in some kind of trance. Her skin was pale, almost grey, and her body was stiff, like she couldn't move. But when she looked at me, I felt her fear. I felt the terror that radiated from her, the real Lily. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms, holding her tight. She didn't say a word, but her hands clung to me, her tiny body trembling with fear. "Mommy, we have to go. We have to leave. They're coming for us." Her voice was barely a whisper, a breathless sob. I turned, but the room was no longer empty. The twisted version of Lily stood in the doorway, its grin wider than before, eyes gleaming with malice. It spoke in a voice that wasn't Lily's anymore, but 1,000 voices all at once. "You can't escape. You can't take her. She belongs to us now." I didn't look back. I couldn't. With my daughter in my arms, I ran, my feet pounding against the floor, the sound of the thing behind me growing louder, closer. I burst out of the room, slamming the door behind me, and for a moment there was silence. Then the baby monitor crackled again. I turned it on, my breath catching in my throat, not knowing what to expect. But this time, there was no whisper, no voice, only silence. And then a single word. Gone. The nightmare was over. But the fear would stay with me forever. And I still don't know if I saved her, or if I brought something even darker into our lives. I don't know if Lily is truly back, or if she ever was to begin with. But one thing is certain, whatever was in that nursery, whatever was waiting for me, is still out there.